If he cheated, it's because you failed as a wife," my mother-in-law said calmly, as if she were commenting on the weather. My husband didn't deny it, he didn't defend me, he didn't even look at me. He just stared at his plate. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end. And tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this has reached." The dining room felt too quiet for a Tuesday night. The same oak table, the same 3 chairs, the same routine we'd followed for years. But something had shifted, something I couldn't name until that moment. Or maybe, I had known, I just hadn't wanted to admit it. I kept my hands folded in my lap, fingers pressed together so tightly they hurt. I didn't trust them not to shake if I reached for my glass. Across from me, my mother-in-law continued eating as if nothing unusual had been said. Slow, precise movements, a small sip of water, a napkin dabbed lightly at the corner of her lips. Control, that was her specialty. And beside her, my husband, the man I had built a life with for nearly 10 years, sat in silence like a stranger renting space at the table. I looked at him, waiting for something, a word, a glance, a sign that this was all some kind of misunderstanding. He shifted slightly in his chair, then lowered his head even further. That was my answer. The overhead light buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow over everything, the plates, the polished wood, the faces I thought I knew. I realized then that I was the only one surprised. "You've been distant for months," my mother-in-law added, her tone still calm, almost instructional. "A man notices these things." I turned to her slowly. There it was, not anger, not even cruelty. Something colder. Certainty. As if she had already decided the outcome of this story, and my role in it. I could have argued. I could have asked him right there, in front of her, to tell the truth, to say her name, to explain how long it had been going on. But I didn't. Instead, I reached for my napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it beside my plate. "I see," I said quietly. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was steadier, thinner, like it belonged to someone watching from a distance. Neither of them responded. Of course they didn't. For them, this conversation was already over. I pushed my chair back slowly, careful not to let it scrape too loudly against the floor. Small details mattered in moments like this. Control. I had learned something tonight. Not about the affair. Not about the woman he had chosen. But about the 2 people sitting at that table. One who betrayed me. And one who made sure he never had to answer for it. I walked out of the dining room without another word. And for the first time since I married into that family, I stopped trying to belong. I didn't go far. Just up the stairs, just behind a closed door. But the house felt different the moment I stepped away from that table. Quieter, colder. As if something had been decided downstairs, and the rest of the house already knew. I stood in the bedroom for a while without turning on the light. The hallway glow stretched across the floor, stopping just short of my feet. 10 years. That's how long I had lived in that house. Long enough to memorize the way the floor creaked near the closet. Long enough to know which window rattled when the wind picked up. Long enough to believe it was mine too. But standing there, in the half-dark, I realized something simple. I had never belonged here. I sat down on the edge of the bed, hands resting on my knees, still and empty. I tried to think of the last time my husband had looked at me the way he used to. Not politely, not out of habit. But with intention. I couldn't. Instead, other memories came. Late nights, locked screens, phone calls that ended the second I walked into the room. I had noticed. Of course I had noticed. But I told myself it was work, stress, distance that happens after years of marriage. It was easier to adjust than to question. Downstairs, I heard the faint clink of dishes. My mother-in-law. Cleaning up. Of course she was. She had always liked things neat, ordered, in control. I could picture her perfectly without seeing her, standing at the sink. Sleeves rolled just enough, moving with calm precision. Like nothing had happened. Like what she said at dinner was just practical advice. A man has needs. The words settled into my mind now. Heavier than before. Not loud. Just permanent. I leaned back slightly, staring at the ceiling. There was a time she used to smile at me. Soft, welcoming. Or at least, convincing enough that I believed it. I remembered the first year after the wedding. The small compliments, the careful guidance. "You'll learn," she used to say. "This family has its ways." I thought she meant traditions. Now I understood. It wasn't about traditions. It was about roles. And mine had always been temporary. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Slow steps. Measured. He paused outside the door. I didn't move, didn't speak. For a moment, I thought he might come in. Explain. Say something, anything, that could still be called honesty. But the handle didn't turn. After a few seconds, the footsteps continued down the hall. Further away. Back toward the stairs. I closed my eyes. That was the second answer. Not the affair. Not the silence at dinner. But this. Walking past the door, like there was nothing left inside worth facing. I sat there for a long time after that. Not crying. Not angry. Just still. Trying to understand how something could end so quietly. And then, slowly, another thought began to settle in. Not about what I had lost. But about what they believed. They thought I would stay quiet, adjust, accept. Just like before. I looked around the room one more time, the furniture, the closet, the life I had arranged piece by piece. Then I reached for my phone. If there was one thing I had learned from living in that house, it was this. Silence doesn't mean surrender. I didn't call anyone that night. No friends, no family. There was no one I trusted enough to explain something I hadn't fully understood myself. Instead, I opened my phone and scrolled. Not aimlessly. Carefully. Message threads, call logs, small details that used to feel insignificant. Now, they felt deliberate. There was a number I didn't recognize. No name, just a string of digits that appeared more often than it should have. Late at night, early mornings, short calls. Never long enough to seem suspicious, if you weren't paying attention. I tapped on it. No messages. Of course not. He wasn't careless. That had always been one of his strengths. And now, I realized it had become something else. I leaned back against the headboard, phone resting in my hand, and let the timeline settle in my mind. 3 months ago, he started coming home later. 2 months ago, he stopped leaving his phone on the counter. A few weeks ago, he stopped asking how my day was. It wasn't sudden. It was systematic. Like something being removed piece by piece. Until there was nothing left to notice. I opened our shared calendar. Appointments, meetings, family dinners. Everything looked normal. That was the problem. Everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to. Except it wasn't. Downstairs, the house had gone quiet. Too quiet. Even the sound of dishes had stopped. For a moment, I wondered if they were talking about me. Then I realized they didn't need to. People only whisper when there's something left to hide. I set my phone down on the nightstand and stood up slowly. The room felt smaller than before. Or maybe, I was just seeing it clearly for the first time. I walked to the closet and opened it. My clothes were still there. Neatly arranged, color-coded, just the way I liked them. Shoes lined up, bags in their place. Everything exactly where I had left it. You could live inside a space like this for years, and still not own a single part of it. I reached up and ran my fingers along the hangers, one by one. There was a time I thought building a life meant filling rooms. Buying furniture, organizing closets, learning routines. But none of that meant anything, if you could be erased this easily. A faint vibration broke the silence. My phone. I turned back toward the bed. One new message. From him. I stared at the screen for a moment before opening it. "We'll talk tomorrow." That was it. No explanation, no apology, no name. Just a delay. I let out a quiet breath. Tomorrow. As if time was the issue. As if one more night would change anything. I placed the phone back down without replying. There was nothing left to say tonight. Not to him. Not to anyone downstairs. But as I stood there, in a room that no longer felt like mine, another realization settled in. Clearer than before. This wasn't just about an affair. It wasn't just about a man who had chosen someone else. It was about a system. A house where silence was expected, where blame was redirected, where truth was optional. And I had been living inside it for 10 years. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. Outside, the street was still. Dim streetlights, empty sidewalks. Everything looked normal. That was the dangerous part. I let the curtain fall back into place. Then I picked up my phone again. Not to call him. Not to respond. But to search. If they had spent months building something behind my back, then I would spend the next few days understanding exactly what it was. Because one thing was certain now. They thought I didn't know anything. They were wrong. Morning came quietly. No slammed doors, no raised voices. Just the soft hum of the house waking up, like nothing had changed. I didn't go downstairs right away. Instead, I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, letting the light slowly fill the room. The same room I had woken up in for years. But this morning, it felt unfamiliar. Not because anything had moved, but because I had. I turned my head slightly and looked at the empty space beside me. He hadn't come to bed. That wasn't new. What was new was that I no longer wondered why. I sat up slowly, pulling the blanket aside, feet touching the floor with care. Even that small movement felt deliberate. Like everything I did now mattered. Like I was finally paying attention. Downstairs, I could hear voices. Low, controlled. His voice, and hers. My mother-in-law. I didn't need to hear the words to understand the tone. Calm, certain. Planning. I stood there for a moment, listening without trying to listen. Then I walked to the door and opened it. The hallway was bright now. Clean, still. Nothing out of place. I made my way down the stairs. Each step steady, measured. When I reached the kitchen, they both stopped talking. Of course they did. My mother-in-law was standing by the counter, pouring coffee into 2 cups. Not 3. She didn't look surprised to see me. She rarely looked surprised by anything. "Good morning," she said, placing 1 cup in front of my husband. Her tone was neutral, polite. Like the night before hadn't happened. Like she hadn't just rewritten my marriage in a single sentence. I nodded once. Didn't sit down. Didn't ask for coffee. My husband glanced at me briefly, then looked away again. That same movement. That same silence. Consistent. Reliable. I realized then, this wasn't new behavior. It just hadn't been this obvious before. "I assume you've both had time to think," my mother-in-law continued, turning slightly toward me. Not aggressive. Not emotional. Just controlled. As if she were leading a meeting. I said nothing. She took that as permission to continue. "This doesn't need to become complicated," she said. "These things happen. The sooner we handle it properly, the better it will be for everyone." Handle it. Properly. I watched her for a second longer. Then I looked at him. Still silent. Still avoiding. I could have asked him again. Forced him to speak. But I already knew the answer. And more importantly, I knew something else now. They were aligned. Completely. This wasn't a mistake he was trying to fix. It was a situation they were trying to manage. Together. "I'm not interested in making a scene," I said finally. My voice was calm, even. It surprised him. I saw it in the slight pause. The way his hand tightened around the coffee cup. Good. Let him be unsure for once. My mother-in-law studied me for a moment. Carefully. As if she were trying to decide whether I understood the role she had assigned me. I held her gaze. Didn't challenge. Didn't submit. Just present. That seemed to be enough. "For now," she said, turning back to the counter. "It would be best if we keep things respectful." Respectful. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. But because it was clear. Respect, in this house, had never meant fairness. It meant silence. Agreement. Convenience. I nodded once more. Then turned and walked out of the kitchen. Not upstairs. Not outside. Just into the living room. A space I had decorated myself. Chosen every detail. Every color. Every piece of furniture. And yet, standing there, I felt like a guest. I reached for my bag, which I had left on the chair the night before. Opened it. Checked inside. Phone, wallet, keys. Everything I needed. I paused for a second, then added something else to that list. Clarity. Because whatever they thought this was, whatever version of the story they were already building, I wasn't part of it anymore. Not in the way they expected. And this time, I wasn't going to adjust. I didn't leave the house right away. I just stepped outside. The air felt different, cooler than it should have been for that time of year. Or maybe it was just the first breath I had taken without holding something back. I stood on the front porch for a moment, keys in my hand, not moving. 10 years. I had walked in and out of that door thousands of times. Groceries, work, holidays, late nights, early mornings. Always returning. That had been the pattern. Until now. I walked to my car slowly, each step steady, like I was learning the distance for the first time. When I opened the door, I didn't get in immediately. Instead, I looked back at the house. From the outside, it was exactly the same. Neatly trimmed lawn, clean windows, curtains drawn just enough to suggest privacy without hiding anything. Perfect. That was always important to her. Appearances. I got into the car and closed the door quietly. For a moment, I just sat there. Hands on the wheel, engine off. Thinking. Not about the affair. Not even about him. But about something else. Control. That word had followed me since last night. At the table, in the kitchen, in every sentence she spoke. And now I understood something I hadn't seen clearly before. This was never just his house. It was hers. Her rules, her structure, her version of how things should work. And he had learned to fit into it. So had I. The difference was, I had believed I could change it. I started the engine. The sound broke the silence in a way that felt final. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just drove. Past the same streets, the same coffee shop, the same grocery store where I knew exactly which aisle had what. Everything familiar. Everything suddenly distant. After about 15 minutes, I pulled into a small parking lot near a quiet cafe. I didn't go inside. I stayed in the car. Phone in hand. This time, I didn't scroll. I searched. The number from last night. I typed it in slowly, double-checking each digit. There were results. Not many. But enough. A name. A business listing. A photo. I stared at the screen. She looked ordinary. That was the first thing I noticed. Not younger in a way that explained anything. Not remarkable in a way that justified it. Just someone. Which made it worse. Because it meant this wasn't about something I lacked. It was about something he chose. I saved the information without thinking too much about it. Name, number, address. Not for confrontation. Not yet. Just to understand. My phone buzzed. A message. From him again. We need to talk today. I looked at the screen for a few seconds. Then locked it. He was right. We did need to talk. But not the way he thought. Not in the kitchen, with her standing nearby. Not in a conversation already decided before it began. I leaned back in my seat, eyes forward, watching nothing in particular. For the first time since last night, everything felt clear. Not easier, but clearer. This wasn't something I needed to fix. It was something I needed to see completely. And for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't afraid of what I might find. I didn't go back home right away. I stayed in that parking lot longer than I needed to. Long enough for the coffee shop to fill up. Long enough for people to come and go without noticing me sitting there. Normal life, moving forward. I watched it for a while. Then I picked up my phone again. This time, I didn't search her. I searched something else. Our names. Mine and his. Property records, business listings, anything tied to both of us. Not because I was suspicious before. But because I had never needed to look. Trust does that. It removes the need to verify. Now, I verified everything. The house came up first. Joint ownership. That didn't surprise me. What did, was the date. It had been updated. 8 months ago. I stared at the screen a little longer than I expected. 8 months. That was before the late nights. Before the distance became obvious. Before I even had a reason to question anything. I clicked further. Documents. Transfers. Minor adjustments. Nothing illegal. Nothing dramatic. Just careful. Planned. I leaned back in my seat. Phone still in my hand. This wasn't something that happened overnight. This wasn't a mistake. It was a process. A quiet one. The kind you don't notice until it's already finished. I opened our joint account next. Balances. Transactions. Automatic payments. Everything looked normal at first glance. But I wasn't looking the way I used to. I slowed down. Scrolled line by line. And then I saw it. A recurring transfer. Small enough not to stand out. Consistent enough to matter. Every month. Same amount. Same destination. I tapped into the details. Different name. Not his. Not mine. But familiar. I had seen it earlier. On that screen. Her name. I didn't react. Didn't feel the rush of anger I expected. Just recognition. Another piece. Another confirmation. I locked my phone and set it down on my lap. For a long moment, I didn't move. Didn't think. Just sat there, letting it settle. He hadn't just chosen someone else. He had been supporting her. Planning around her. Building something parallel. And downstairs, at that table, they had expected me to sit there and accept it. Adjust. Like it was a phase. Like it was normal. I let out a slow breath. Not heavy. Not emotional. Just steady. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Where are you? I looked at it. Didn't answer. A few seconds later, another one. Mom says we should talk this through calmly. I almost smiled. Of course she did. Calm. Structured. Controlled. That was always her language. I picked up the phone. Typed a reply. Then stopped. Deleted it. Put the phone back down. They still thought this was a conversation. Something to negotiate. Something to guide me through. They were wrong. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small notebook I hadn't used in years. Flipped it open. Blank pages. I found a pen. And I started writing. Names, dates, transfers, details. Not everything. Just enough. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was documenting. And somewhere between the first line and the second, something shifted. Not outside. Not in the situation. But in me. They had spent months building their version of the truth. Quietly. Carefully. Without me noticing. Now it was my turn. And I wasn't going to raise my voice. I wasn't going to argue. I was just going to make sure. Nothing they built could stand once I was done. I didn't rush back. There was no reason to. For 10 years, I had been the one adjusting my schedule, my tone, my expectations, fitting myself into a life that now felt prearranged. Today, I let time move without me. By the time I drove back, the house looked the same as always. Still, perfect. Untouched by anything real. I parked in the driveway and turned off the engine. For a moment, I just sat there again. Not hesitating. Just observing. Because now I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about structure. A system that had been built long before I noticed it. And I had been placed inside it, without ever seeing the full design. I stepped out of the car and walked inside. The door wasn't locked. It never was. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and something recently cleaned. My mother-in-law's signature. Reset the space, removed the evidence, maintained control. I placed my keys on the table gently. No one came to greet me. Of course not. I walked into the living room. She was there. Sitting upright on the couch. Hands folded neatly in her lap. As if she had been waiting. My husband stood near the window. Back turned, looking out. Same positions. Different roles. You took your time, she said. Not accusing. Just noting. I needed to, I replied. My voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. She studied me for a moment. Not my words. My posture. My tone. Trying to measure something. "Sit down," she said. Not an invitation. A direction. I didn't move. Not immediately. Then I walked past the chair she had indicated, and sat down across from her instead. A small change. But I saw it. The pause. Barely a second. Still, there. Good. My husband turned slightly, just enough to glance at me. Then looked away again. Consistent. Predictable. "You said you wanted to talk," I said. I kept it simple. No emotion. No edge. She nodded once. "This situation can be resolved," she began, folding one hand over the other. "But it requires maturity from everyone involved." Maturity. I let the word sit there. Unchallenged. "She's not going anywhere," she continued. Not a confession. A statement. Final. My husband shifted slightly behind her. Didn't speak. Didn't correct her. Of course he didn't. And I'm not asking her to. I said. That made him look at me. Really look at me. For the first time since last night. Confusion. Just for a second. Then it disappeared. My mother-in-law tilted her head slightly. That was new. She hadn't expected that answer. "Then I'm not sure what you want," she said. There it was. The assumption. That I was here to ask. To negotiate. To be guided toward acceptance. I held her gaze. Steady. "I don't want anything," I said. Silence. Not heavy. Just unexpected. "You don't want to fix your marriage?" she asked. Still calm. Still controlled. As if the outcome depended on how well she framed the question. I almost smiled. But didn't. "I understand it now," I said instead. That was enough. She leaned back slightly. Not much. Just enough to create distance. Recalibrating. For the first time, she didn't have the next step ready. Behind her, my husband moved. A small step forward. Then stopped. Still unsure. Good. Let him feel that. Let both of them feel it. I reached into my bag and took out the notebook. Placed it on the table in front of me. Didn't open it. Just let it sit there. A quiet presence. A signal. I wasn't here to argue. I wasn't here to react. I was here because I knew something they didn't expect me to know. And for the first time since I walked into that house, the balance had shifted. Slightly. But enough. They just didn't realize it yet. No one touched the notebook. But I saw the way she looked at it. Not directly. Just a brief glance, quick enough to deny. Slow enough to register. Good. Let her wonder. "What is that?" my husband asked finally. His voice was low, careful. Like he wasn't sure what he was stepping into. I didn't answer right away. I opened the notebook slowly, flipping past a few pages. Names, dates, numbers. Nothing dramatic at first glance. But enough to make someone uncomfortable, if they knew what they were looking at. I started writing things down. I said. Simple. Neutral. My mother-in-law didn't move. But her posture changed, just slightly. More alert. "What things?" she asked. Still calm. Always calm. I turned one page toward them. Not fully. Just enough. "A timeline," I said. My husband stepped closer. I could feel it without looking. The shift in the room. Small. But real. "You've been transferring money every month," I added, glancing at him briefly. Same account. Same name. Silence. Not denial. Not shock. Just silence. That told me everything I needed. My mother-in-law spoke first. Of course she did. "If you're implying something inappropriate," she said, "you should be very careful." There it was. Not a defense. A warning. I met her gaze. "I'm not implying anything," I said. "I'm documenting." That word landed differently. I could see it. She leaned back again, fingers tightening slightly over each other. Behind her, my husband finally spoke. "It's not what you think." The first sentence he had offered since last night. I nodded once. "Then explain it," I said. No anger. No pressure. Just space. He didn't fill it. Of course he didn't. Because explanations require clarity. And clarity wasn't something he had prepared. She needed help, he said after a moment. Weak. Incomplete. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The notebook was still open between us. Silent. But louder than anything he could say. My mother-in-law stepped in again. She's going through a difficult time, she said. Your husband is simply being responsible. Responsible. I almost smiled again. The choice of words. Always careful. Always framed. As a husband? I asked quietly. That was the first time her expression shifted. Not much. But enough. A fraction of a second where the answer didn't come immediately. Then it returned. Controlled. Sharp. As a man, she said. There it was. The justification. Clean. Final. I closed the notebook. Not abruptly. Just finished with that page. I see, I said. And I did. More clearly than before. This wasn't something they were hiding anymore. It was something they had already decided was acceptable. Explained. Resolved. Without me. My husband exhaled, like he thought the tension might ease now. Like this was the part where I would either cry, or argue, or break. I did none of that. Instead, I placed the notebook back into my bag. Carefully. Like it mattered. Because it did. Then we don't have anything to discuss, I said. That stopped him. Completely. What do you mean? He asked. For the first time, there was something in his voice. Not authority. Not certainty. Something closer to uncertainty. I stood up. Not fast. Not slow. Just done sitting. You've already made your decisions, I said, both of you. I looked at him. Then at her. Equal. Clear. I'm just making mine. Silence again. But this time, it felt different. Not controlled. Not structured. Uncertain. And for the first time since this started, they weren't the ones guiding the conversation anymore. They just didn't realize yet how much control they had already lost. No one stopped me when I stood up. That was the first thing I noticed. Not a word, not a movement. Just silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. Before, it had been controlled. Now, it felt uncertain. Where are you going? My husband asked. I paused. Not because I needed to think. Just to let the question settle. Out, I said. Simple. He took a step forward. Not enough to block me. Just enough to show he was no longer sure where he stood. We're not finished, he added. I turned slightly. Looked at him. For the first time that day, I didn't see hesitation. I saw confusion. And something else. Concern. You were finished last night, I said. My voice stayed even. No one told me that, he replied quickly. That almost made me smile. Almost. You didn't have to, I said. I let the words hang there for a second. Then added, you showed me. Silence again. Behind him, my mother-in-law stood up slowly. Not rushed. Never rushed. If you walk out like this, she said, you're making things more difficult than they need to be. Difficult. That word again. I turned toward her fully this time. Held her gaze. For who? I asked. That was the first question she didn't answer immediately. A small pause. But it was there. For everyone, she said finally. Of course. Always, everyone. Never specific. Never accountable. I nodded once. Then reached for the door. My hand rested on the handle for a moment before I opened it. Then maybe it's time things got difficult, I said. I didn't wait for a response. I stepped outside. Closed the door behind me. The sound was quiet. But it carried. I could feel it. Even without looking back. I walked to my car again. Same path as earlier. But this time, it felt different. Lighter. Not easier. Just clearer. I got in, started the engine, and pulled away without hesitation. No destination. Not yet. I drove for a while before stopping. This time, it wasn't a cafe. It was a small office building. Plain. Neutral. The kind of place you don't notice unless you're looking for it. I parked and sat there for a second. Then reached into my bag. Pulled out my phone. Opened the contacts I hadn't used in years. Scrolled. Stopped. A name. I stared at it for a moment. Then pressed call. It rang twice. Hello? A voice answered. Professional. Calm. Familiar. It's me, I said. A brief pause. Then recognition. I didn't expect to hear from you, he said. I know, I replied. I looked up at the building in front of me. Took a slow breath. I need to review everything, I added. Everything? He asked. Yes. Not rushed. Not emotional. Just certain. There was another pause on the line. Longer this time. Then. Come in. I ended the call. Stepped out of the car. Closed the door behind me. For the second time that day. But this one felt different. This wasn't stepping away. This was stepping into something. Something they hadn't prepared for. Something they couldn't control. I walked toward the building without looking back. Because for the first time since this started, I wasn't reacting to their decisions anymore. I was making my own. The office smelled like paper and coffee. Clean, neutral, quiet. Nothing like the house I had just left. No tension in the air, no silent expectations. Just space. He was already waiting when I walked in. Older than I remembered, a little more gray, but the same steady expression. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. This time, it was an invitation. I sat. Placed my bag on my lap. Didn't speak right away. Neither did he. He just watched me for a moment. Not judging. Assessing. You said everything, he began. Start there. I nodded once. Then opened my bag and took out the notebook. Set it on the desk. Opened to the pages I had written earlier. Names, dates, transfers. He leaned forward slightly. Didn't interrupt. Just read. The room stayed quiet except for the faint sound of pages turning. After a minute, he looked up. When did you find out? He asked. Last night, I said. And this? He tapped lightly on one of the entries. This morning. He nodded slowly. Not surprised. Just confirming. Do they know you have this? He asked. No. Good. That word landed differently than anything I had heard all day. Not controlling. Not dismissive. Just practical. He closed the notebook gently. Folded his hands. Then let's be clear, he said, you're not here because of the affair. I didn't answer. Because he was right. You're here because of what comes with it. He continued. Assets, transfers, positioning. Positioning. That word stayed with me. Because it was exactly what it felt like. Not emotional. Strategic. They've been preparing, he added. Yes, I said. And they assumed you wouldn't. He finished. I met his eyes. I didn't, I said. Until now. A small pause. Then he leaned back in his chair. You still have control, he said. Simple. Direct. I didn't react. Not outwardly. But something in my chest shifted. Not relief. Not yet. Just recognition. Joint ownership gives you leverage, he continued, and if those transfers are consistent, there are questions that can be asked. Questions. Not accusations. Not conclusions. Just questions. And suddenly, that felt more powerful than anything else. What do I need to do? I asked. My voice was steady. For the first time, fully aligned with what I was thinking. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a folder on his desk. Opened it. Pulled out a few documents. We don't rush, he said, we don't react. That sounded familiar. But different. We observe, we verify, and when we move, it's final. Final. I nodded. Because I understood that language. Better than I had ever understood the one spoken in that house. He slid the papers toward me. First, we secure what's already yours, he said. I looked down at the documents. Legal terms, signatures, dates. Clear. Structured. Real. Then, he added, We decide what they no longer have access to. I placed my hand on the papers. Didn't sign yet. Just felt the weight of them. This wasn't a reaction. This wasn't anger. This was something else. Something they hadn't accounted for. I looked up at him. They think he'll come back and talk, I said. He gave a small nod. They're expecting you to, he replied. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. I picked up the pen. Held it between my fingers. Steady. For now, I said, I'll let them think that. Then I lowered the pen to the paper. And signed. Quietly. Without hesitation. Because for the first time since this started, I wasn't part of their plan anymore. I was writing my own. I didn't go back to the house that afternoon. Not immediately. There was no urgency anymore. That was the difference. Before, everything had felt like something I needed to fix quickly. A conversation to have, a situation to resolve. Now, it felt like something that had already been decided. Just not by them. I stepped out of the office building with the folder in my hand. Thin. But heavy. Not because of what it weighed, but because of what it meant. Outside, the day had moved on. People walking, cars passing, conversations happening that had nothing to do with me. It felt strange. How something so contained could feel so final. I got into my car and sat there for a moment. Then I reached for my phone. 3 missed calls. All from him. 1 message. Where are you? We need to settle this today. I read it once. Then locked the screen. Set the phone aside. For the first time, I wasn't responding to urgency that wasn't mine. I started the engine and drove. This time, I knew where I was going. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. Of course it did. Nothing on the outside had changed. That was always the illusion. I stepped inside. They were both there. Waiting. Same positions as before. But the energy had shifted. Less control. More tension. You're back, my mother-in-law said. Not warm. Not cold. Just measured. I am, I replied. I placed my bag on the table. Kept the folder in my hand. My husband stepped forward this time. Closer than before. We've been trying to reach you, he said. I saw, I answered. No apology. No explanation. Just acknowledgement. That seemed to unsettle him more than anything else. We need to talk, he said again. The same line. But it didn't carry the same weight anymore. We already did, I said. I walked past him. Not toward the kitchen. Not toward the stairs. Just into the living room. The same space I had stood in that morning. Only now, it felt different. Because I was. They followed. Of course they did. My mother-in-law stayed slightly behind him. Still positioning. Still observing. I turned to face them. Calm. Steady. I won't be staying here, I said. No build-up. No explanation. Just the decision. My husband blinked. Once. Twice. That's not necessary, he said quickly. We can figure this out. Figure this out. I almost recognized that version of him. The one that believed everything could be adjusted, as long as it stayed convenient. For who? I asked. The same question as before. But this time, I didn't wait for an answer. I placed the folder on the table. Didn't open it. Didn't explain it. Just let it sit there. A quiet line between us. My mother-in-law looked at it. Longer this time. No attempt to hide it. What is that? She asked. I met her eyes. Something I should have looked at a long time ago, I said. She didn't respond. But I saw it. That brief flicker. Not fear. Not yet. But awareness. My husband reached for the folder. I didn't stop him. He opened it. Flipped through the first page. Then the second. His expression changed. Slowly. Confusion first. Then something sharper. What is this? He asked. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't step closer. It's the part you didn't think I would see, I said. Silence. He looked back down at the pages. Then at me. Then at her. For the first time, he wasn't sure where to stand. Good. Let him feel that. Let both of them feel it. Because for the first time since this started, they weren't managing the situation anymore. They were reacting to it. And this time, I wasn't going to explain anything. They would have to figure it out themselves. No one spoke after that. Not immediately. The room stayed still, but not in the same way as before. This wasn't controlled silence. This was uncertainty. My husband kept flipping through the pages. Slower now, like he was trying to find something he could hold on to. Something that would put him back in control. He didn't find it. "What did you do?" he asked finally. I didn't answer the question. Because it wasn't the right one. I paid attention. I said. That was enough. Behind him, my mother-in-law didn't move. But I could see it now. Not the calm. Not the control. Something underneath it. Something she hadn't needed to show before. Because she had never needed to. "You're overreacting," she said. Her voice was still steady. But it didn't land the same way anymore. Not after everything. I looked at her. Really looked this time. For years, I had tried to understand her. Tried to earn something that was never meant to be given. Respect, approval, belonging. Now I saw it clearly. It was never about me. It was about control. And I had finally stepped outside of it. "I'm not reacting," I said quietly. "I'm leaving." My husband looked up. Fast. "That's not how this works," he said. There it was. The belief. That there were rules. That I still had to follow them. "That's exactly how it works," I replied. Calm. Certain. No hesitation. He stood there, still holding the papers, like they might change if he looked at them long enough. "They don't," I added. He frowned. "What?" "The numbers," I said. "They don't change just because you want them to." Silence. That one stayed. Because it wasn't about money. It was about truth. And for the first time, it was sitting in front of them. Clear. Unavoidable. My mother-in-law took a small step forward. Not toward me. Toward the table. Toward the folder. Trying to reclaim something. But she didn't touch it. Not this time. I picked up my bag. Same bag I had checked that morning. Phone, wallet, keys. Everything I needed. Only now, it felt different. Lighter. Not because I had less. But because I had stopped holding on to what wasn't mine. "I'll have someone contact you," I said. Not a threat. Not an explanation. Just the next step. My husband opened his mouth. Closed it again. For once, he didn't know what to say. I turned toward the door. Walked the same path. Living room, hallway, front door. Each step steady. Familiar. But no longer tied to anything behind me. I paused for a moment with my hand on the handle. Not because I was unsure. But because I understood something now that I hadn't before. For 10 years, I had tried to belong in that house. Tried to fit into a space that was never designed for me. And I thought leaving would feel like losing something. It didn't. I opened the door. Stepped outside. Closed it quietly behind me. The air felt the same as it had that morning. Cool, still. But I wasn't the same. Not anymore. I walked to my car without looking back. Didn't need to. Because everything that mattered was already with me. And everything that didn't was finally staying where it belonged. Inside that house.